Welcome to The Ethical Advocate for Accidents.
Welcome to the Ethical Advocate for Accidents with Attorney James Sadigh. For more than 35 years, James has helped injured Californians navigate personal injury claims, insurance disputes, habitability issues, and wrongful termination matters, always with a focus on ethics and clear, honest communication. I'm Leanne Lyon, and today we are joined by a criminal defense attorney, Jasmine Hagani. Together, we're discussing what happens in California when an accident involves a driver who has no insurance and how that affects both criminal exposure and the injured person's ability to recover damages. Jasmine, in California, is driving without liability insurance a criminal offense, and what penalties can follow?
Yes, it is. It's usually it's an infraction when you're driving without insurance, and in a criminal court, usually that happens w- when somebody's been pulled over for drive speeding, license plate, any other vehicle code violation. And then, obviously the police ask for the insurance, and, the person doesn't have it. And so they'll be cited for that as well. Um, Usually, if you bring a proof of insurance to the proceeding, they'll usually dismiss it. But we have another issue is when the DMV finds out, you're driving without insurance, they can start suspending your license and taking other measures when it comes to situations like that.
If someone causes an accident and is uninsured, how does that affect the driver's license under California DMV rules?
As far as not having insurance and being involved in an accident, many things will happen. First thing is the DMV will find out and is going to suspend the driver license. In that situation, the person either has to prove that he had insurance, which he didn't, or he has to go through certain proceedings and hearings. And after a while, if he is able to afford to buy a bond and agree for a period of time to only drive between his work and home or do not drive, then he may be able to drive for that period, usually about a year or so, uh, provided that he has deposited a bond or has a special insurance for that purpose. And if nothing else happens during that year to him, he may be able to get his driver license back to normal. And it's not a very pleasant way of life in Southern California if you cannot drive all over the places. Uh, as far as the civil matters, if he doesn't have insurance and he is at fault in the accident, then God helps him because people will sue him. He doesn't have insurance to defend him. And he may, if he doesn't have the money to pay any judgments against him, he may end up being in a bankruptcy.
So, James, likewise, from the injury claim perspective, what changes when the at fault driver has no insurance coverage?
Well, if at fault driver doesn't have a insurance coverage, then the party who is injured and damaged hopefully has the coverage under his own or her own insurance policy called uninsured motorist. So he can go and prove that party A, who caused the accident, did not have insurance. And in order to prove that he didn't have insurance, he has to go to DMV, file certain forms, wait about a month, and then file another form with $20, which is called SR19, and DMV will send a certificate that this person did not have insurance. Use that certificate, go to his own insurance and say, here, I proven that the party at fault did not have insurance coverage. And since I have bought uninsured motorist provision, pay me whatever I deserve under this accident. Medical bills, pain and suffering, loss of earning, whatever that is.
So, James, are there types of damages that become difficult or impossible to collect when the at fault driver lacks coverage?
Yes. It depends on the policy that my client would have at the time. Sometimes the uninsured motorist policies have a property damage uninsured motorist, which is limited to a certain amount. And if they don't have it, then my client is out of luck for the damage to his vehicle because the party that hit him didn't have insurance and he doesn't have uninsured motorist coverage, property damage coverage to pay for his car. And he has no other source to go after. Yes, theoretically, he can sue the party at fault for those damages and get a judgment. How are you going to collect it? If the person did not have insurance, most probably he cannot afford to pay you either.
Jasmine, does the fact that someone was uninsured influence how prosecutors handle the case if injuries are involved?
I would say that it can cause a good weight on the prosecutor's shoulders when somebody's uninsured because, you know, when we look at a criminal case, yes, it's the conduct of the individual as well, but we also have something called restitution. And so through restitution, they'd be ordered to pay the damages or the injuries. And that's usually enforced through probation. Again, if somebody doesn't have insurance, I'm assuming they probably don't have money, to pay certain damages. Um, in the I had a case where it was a hit and run situation and my client didn't have insurance, and so she was left with an egregious amount of damages that she had to pay for out of pocket. It took her a while to get that money together, and at the end of the day, she this was actually a different situation because she ended up getting a disposition that was in her favor and that it wouldn't affect her for other reasons. But yeah, I mean, I would say that it absolutely does put pressure on a prosecutor, of course, and perhaps there's a little less leeway, when it comes to hefty damages and people that are left injured without compensation. And I think they not that they go harder. I think if it was the other way around, and a criminal defendant came forward and said, "Yeah, you know what? I didn't have insurance. I'll do whatever I can to make this right." Then we're talking, about having remorse and taking responsibility and doing the right thing.
Jasmine, correct me if I'm wrong. In your practice in these type of situations, the prosecutors mostly are encouraged to take care of the victims of the crime and close their files. They prefer the faster thing that way. And if that's the case, when the person doesn't have insurance to take care of the damages that the victim has, it makes it harder to dispose of a case because now the victims are pushing more and the prosecutor cannot do a civil compromise as easily because there's no insurance company to pay. Am I correct on that?
Right, I would say, I mean, what's the incentive on kind of giving somebody an easier disposition versus, these people are left the way that they are. This person's, getting a criminal charge at the end of the day, but these people are left injured. So I would say that if you come in and you take responsibility, then yeah, they're more concerned, I would say, depending on what the criminal act is, right? And what the background of the criminal defendant is this the first time that this is happening? What were the other circumstances that were involved? And I would say that kind of comes into play with a lot of different criminal cases that I come across is usually what are the circumstances, what can we do to make this right where the injuries, very significant, when it comes to situations like this. But yeah, I'd say that, if this was a situation where it was a financial thing more than it was, the conduct of the person, then I would say then it would definitely help, to take care of these victims, when you're talking to a prosecutor. And yeah, as James said, sometimes, like the case that we actually had together was there was no damage to the actual individual. The victims were not in the car. It was a couple or three or four parked cars. It was all property damage. And so once our client came in and said, "Hey, look, I'm going to pay it all off," the prosecutor was more inclined to work it out, I would say.
So at the end of the day, the conclusion is that it's best to have insurance rather than not having it.
Yeah.
That sounds like a very good idea. So, if both drivers were uninsured at the time of an accident, how does that complicate recovery in California?
Well, different circumstances. Both are uninsured. One person is at fault, or both people are pointing finger at each other and say you're at fault. I promise you, no attorney is going to take the case on a civil matter on each side of them because there is no recovery from an insurance company. Unless one of these people is one of the billionaires who have so much asset that the attorney knows, okay, I know if I go after him, sue him, get a judgment, and the injuries are so significant that would be worthwhile to go to litigation to do that. Other than that, in 99% of the occasions, the two parties are going after each other, most probably end up going to a small claims court. And that's where no attorneys can go. And people will get a judgment against them and each other. And whoever wins has to try to find assets on the other person and do the collection. It's not a pretty picture.
Jasmine, anything to add to that?
I totally agree with James. And, there's a lot of different ways that I'd say, I mean, this is a separate conversation, but people can, get out of things and you can sue anybody, I would say, when there's a situation. But the hard part isn't winning. The hard part is collecting. So I would say, if somebody is two people, are driving without insurance, then definitely it could go nowhere. And so not to encourage not to have insurance, but I'd say definitely it's always, a risk when, we're driving. We never know what's going to happen.
Well, while we're on the subject of why is it important to have insurance aside from collection of damages and payment and all of those, there is a law in state of California which is being referred to as Proposition 213. If you are driving and you do not have liability insurance and you're not at fault in the accident, somebody else caused the accident and you're injured, you're not entitled to recover all of your damages because you did not comply with the law of having insurance. You're only going to be entitled to recover your out of pocket expenses. You're not entitled to get money for pain and suffering, emotional distress, or any of those situations, which is in my opinion, a hefty penalty for people who didn't have insurance at the time. Of course, there are exceptions to that rule under Proposition 213. If the party who has hit you was drunk, for example, or was in commission of a crime during the driving, then there's an exception to Proposition 213 if you didn't have insurance. Now you can recover for your pain and suffering. But rarely that happens. I've had, in the 37 years of doing this, I've had only two cases that my client did not have insurance himself, but the party that had caused the accident was drunk. And even though there was no criminal convictions of being a drunk driver, because at the scene of the accident with the police report, it was reported that he had alcohol in his system, we were able to get the pain and suffering for him.
So it sounds like it's more with the uninsured, it's more of a civil issue than a criminal issue. Am I right in hearing that?
As far as recovering damages, yes. The criminal issue for not having insurance, as Jasmine had said before, it's more like, in most occasions, like infraction. And it's basically a slap on the wrist of taking your driver license away. And I understand on Southern California not having a driver license feels like more of a slapped on the wrist. It's like a real punishment because we don't have public transportation the way people have in, for example, New York. But there is no jail time for it.
So, as we're wrapping up here today, when someone is involved in an accident with an uninsured driver, what early decisions can affect whether they ultimately recover anything at all?
Well, I would say, despite the fact that the party at fault may not have had insurance, it is very important to have as much information about the party: name, driver license, license plate number, whatever you can get your hands on. And in most situations, the insurance policies dictate that in order to be able to recover under the provision of uninsured motorist, there has to be a police report. So it's very important that either call the police from the scene if there are injuries involved, or if the police doesn't come to the scene because there is no serious injury, at least go to a nearest police station, or these days go online and file a police report with all the information that you have. Because the insurance companies want to see that you've done that. Some of the insurance companies actually dictate that you have to have police report, so that's very important to do that. So at least you can recover under your own policy.
Well, that's it for today's episode of The Ethical Advocate for Accidents. Jasmine, thank you for joining us today. Audience, if you'd like to learn more about Attorney James Sadigh and his work representing injured Californians, visit jamesksadigh.com. If this episode clarified what happens when insurance is missing from the equation, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Thank you, Jasmine, and thank you, James.
Thank
Thank
you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.